For a few moments, I want to think together about the story I told, the story of Ruth, taken from the book of Ruth in the Bible. And I want to draw a few lessons from it that hopefully we can all gain something from this morning. As you've heard, the story of Ruth is about a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law who stuck together in following God, who supported and cared for each other as they followed God. And Bethany and Brittany, as I thought about you, not a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but a mother and daughter who have stuck together, who support each other, who care for each other, and who now have the opportunity to stick together as you follow God together. As I thought in that way about you, I couldn't help being reminded of Naomi and Ruth, of that story in the Bible. So I particularly had the two of you in mind as I reflected on Naomi and Ruth's story, and I hope the few points I'm going to make from it will be helpful to you. When Ruth followed Naomi back to Bethlehem, she left a lot behind. She left a lot behind. A lot that was familiar to her, a lot that was comfortable to her, her home, her family, her culture, her bedroom, her food. She left behind the gods that she had been raised to worship, which were not the God of Naomi and the people in Bethlehem, the one that they worshipped. And Bethany and Brittany, today you're going to be baptized. And baptism is symbolic of the things in life that we leave behind when we come to follow Jesus. The things we leave behind when we come to follow Jesus. It's as if we bury them in the water and we leave them behind. We leave them there under the water. Things we leave behind that are familiar to us, that may be comfortable to us. Values we leave behind that were part of the life we chose before we chose to follow Jesus. You know, Jesus said, if anyone would follow me, he said a strange thing. He said, let him take up his cross. Let him take up his cross. What did Jesus mean by that? We know Jesus died on a cross, right? In Jesus' day, a cross was used, it's pretty brutal to kill people. And we know that. Like I say, Jesus died on a cross. A cross was a symbol of death. It was a symbol of dying. And when Jesus said to follow him, we must take up our cross, he was saying to follow him, we must give up everything that is incompatible with following him. We must give up everything that is incompatible with following him. We must give up everything in our life, every part of our life, of our old life, before we knew Jesus, that will get in the way of us following him wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly. That old life of ours that wasn't influenced by God, that wasn't influenced by Jesus, that old life must die. It must become a thing of the past. We must give it up. We must leave it behind, just as Ruth gave up and left behind her life in Moab, her people in Moab, to start a new life in Bethlehem with the people of God. And so Ruth left behind her old life. And Bethany and Brittany, all of us who are followers of Christ, let's Ruth's example remind us that to follow Jesus and to really benefit from following him, we must leave behind everything and anything that would pull us away from him. So that's the first thing. Ruth left a lot behind, and we must leave behind anything that will keep us from getting close to Jesus. Secondly, Ruth not only left her old life behind, she also clung very tightly to Naomi. It says she clung very tightly to Naomi. After Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah set off for Bethlehem, and Naomi discouraged Ruth and Orpah from going with her because she knew it would be a tough road for them to go with her. She knew it would be a rough ride because Naomi was so poor. It says at that point, Orpah went back to Moab, but as I've said, it says of Ruth, she clung. She held very tightly to Naomi. That's what she did at that point. And so in pursuing God, Naomi's God, Ruth clung tightly to God's people. In pursuing God, Naomi's God, Ruth clung tightly to God's people. She clung to Naomi. Naomi being an Israelite, one of God's people. And Brittany and Bethany, as you follow God, as you follow Jesus, I encourage you, cling tightly to his people. Cling tightly to his people. God does so much for us. He comes to us. He meets us in so many ways through his people, through the church. I think Ruth knew that if she went back to Moab, as I mentioned earlier, I think Ruth knew if she went back to Moab and lost contact, her connection with Naomi, God's people, she knew she'd lose connection with God himself. She knew that would happen. God's people keep us connected to God. God's people keep us connected to God. They help keep us walking closely with him. I love this story I was told. I'll never forget this. The stories are told of a man and his friend who were sitting in front of one of those old style fires, coal fires, and coal was burning in the fire hearth. And one of the men was asking his friend, the other man, why he needed to be part of the church, why he needed to connect with God's people. As a Christian, could he not just follow Jesus and not worry about being involved with the church, about being involved with and close to other Christians? And at that point, his friend, who had asked the question, picked up a poker that was standing against the wall, and with it, he pulled out a red hot coal out of the fire, out of the pile of coals that was burning in the hearth. And he got this one piece of coal out on its own from the main pile, separated from it. And he got it sitting on its own just in front of them, in front of the fire, away from the main fire, away from the big burning pile of coals. And to begin with, that piece of coal that was on its own was red hot, just like the others in the fire. But very soon, of course, it became very dull. It lost its glow. Soon it went from bright red to a very dull red. And in time, of course, it just went completely black and cold, and the heat in it was extinguished. And his friend, who had asked him why he needed to be involved with the church, he got the point right away. He got the point right away. In the pile of coals connected to the other pieces of coal, that piece of coal was red hot. It was burning bright. But as soon as it got disconnected from the other pieces of coal, it cooled off, it lost its glow, it lost its heat. And so it is with us. If we disconnect from God's people, very soon we lose our glow, our spiritual life. Very soon we lose our warmth, our heat. We lose the warmth, the heat of our faith. We cool off spiritually, just as that piece of coal cooled off there, isolated and on its own. Ruth knew to do well spiritually, to get close to God, she had to stay close to Naomi. She had to stay close to God's people. Naomi, in her case, just about was her connection to God. And as Naomi was to Ruth, God's people are a critical connection for us to God, just as Naomi was for Ruth. To stay close to God, to grow in our relationship with him, we must stay connected. We must stay in close relationship with God's people, And just as Ruth clung to Naomi, we should cling to God's people. We should cling to the church. We should stay involved, plugged in, well connected to the church, so we stay spiritually healthy, spiritually hot, if you like. And as to pursue God, Ruth left. And so to pursue God, Ruth left her old life behind in Moab. She clung to Naomi. She clung and stayed close to God's people, Naomi being one of them. And lastly, I simply want to make the point that Ruth gave. Ruth gave. We've been thinking recently a lot about giving in our church the last 2 Sundays. But I just want to land here finally on the fact that Ruth gave. I was thinking when Ruth and Naomi arrived in Bethlehem, it would have been so easy for Ruth to feel sorry for herself, to feel sorry for Naomi, to have a pity party, to have thought, poor Naomi, she's lost her husband. Poor me, I've lost my husband. Life is so hard. We have it so tough. It would have been so easy for Ruth to develop a victim mentality, to develop the mentality of a taker, to have had a sense of entitlement, to think we are owed. Everyone else has it so good. We have it so hard. We are so needy. Others should give to us. It could have been so easy for Ruth to go down that road. So easy for her to just sit around and cry the blues. But despite having so little, Ruth dug down. She dug down inside herself and she gave what she had. And she gave what she had. She gave the little that she had. She knew her and Naomi had next to nothing. She knew they needed food. So she said to Naomi, let me go and glean. And like I said, that was the name of this practice. When the poor people went into the farmer's fields and they picked up the barley and the wheat stalks that had been left behind for them by the farmers. And as Ruth did what she could, as she gave what she had, even though so small, by going to find barley, yes, for herself, but very much also for Naomi, who was older, who was more frail, who was more vulnerable than Ruth. When Ruth could easily have just thought about herself, she thought about Naomi. Through Ruth, though Ruth could do so little, Though she could do so little, she did what she could. Even though she had so little, she gave what she had. She gave her youthfulness. She gave her energy. She gave her ability to make something happen, to do something. She took that at a time when it had been so easy to just think about herself, to look after herself. And she thought about others. She looked after others. She thought about and looked after Naomi and her needs. And that opened up a whole world for Ruth that completely changed her life. It opened up a whole world. That little act and decision, I'm going to keep giving. I'm not going to sit here and feel sorry for myself. I'm going to keep giving. I'm going to go glean for Naomi. That act of giving opened up a whole world to Ruth that completely changed her life. And you heard the story. So she gave. She gave to Naomi. She gave to Naomi. She gave for Naomi. You know, she ultimately gave for God, I believe. I believe it was her love for God. It was her faith in God that was at the root of her giving, at the root of her love for Naomi. And as she gave to God by giving to Naomi, God gave back to Ruth a blessing she could not contain. God gave back to Ruth a blessing she could not contain. Her life intersected with Boaz, who gave to her, who, as I've told you, gave Ruth, this poor, vulnerable foreigner, living, this refugee, living in Bethlehem. This man Boaz gave her respect. He gave her honor. He gave her food. He gave her drink. He gave her protection. He gave her kindness. In time, he gave her himself as a husband and became a wonderful husband to her. And in time, he gave her a son. And that son, as I told you, had a great-grandchild called David, who became the greatest king of Israel. The greatest king. And that's how God is. That's my point. That's how God is. We give to him a little, and he gives us back so much more. And he gives us back so much more. A blessing we can't contain. And so Bethany, Brittany, you're already givers. You're already wonderful givers. We see that as you pour your lives into each other, as you pour your lives into Amar and Hayden. Let God grow that quality in you. Let God grow that quality in you. Grow you in giving. If you're ever tempted to go down that pity party road, and we all are, like Ruth, bypass it, skip it, and remain givers. Keep giving, however little it might be that you have to give. Give to others, give to others, give to God, give for others, and see how he'll give back to you a blessing you can't contain. Amen. 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 So we are going to move now to the baptism, which obviously takes place over there. And I want to encourage everybody to move